What if I told you that one of the world's most luxurious car brands, the mighty Rolls-Royce, was born not in a royal garage or a millionaire's mansion, but in the hands of a poor boy who once fixed street lamps to survive? A boy whose dreams were too big for the life he was born into, yet powerful enough to change the course of automotive history. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the home of stories that prove no dream is too impossible. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story is about how one man's relentless spirit turned poverty into perfection. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that life dealt you the wrong cards? That no matter how hard you try, success always feels just one step away? Well, today's story might change how you see those struggles forever. It's about Henry Royce, a boy born into hardship in 19th century England, a time when opportunity was a privilege, not a promise. He didn't have fancy schooling or a powerful family name. What he had were hands that worked harder than anyone else's, and a mind that refused to quit. From fixing doorbells and streetlights to building the car that would redefine luxury, this is not just the story of a company. It's the story of what happens when determination meets destiny. In this episode, we'll walk through the alleys of Henry's childhood poverty, step into his first tiny workshop filled with oil lamps and broken machines, and witness the moment he met Charles Rolls, the man whose name would forever be joined with his. Together, they created a brand that became the gold standard of excellence, a name that, even a century later, still symbolizes perfection and prestige. But behind every masterpiece lies pain, doubt, and sacrifice. How did this poor boy rise from the shadows of struggle to create a legacy that kings, queens, and billionaires still admire today? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about a car. It's a story about vision, grit, and the courage to never settle for less than the best. So buckle up and get ready as we uncover the untold journey of how a poor boy created Rolls-Royce. And before we begin, remember, greatness often starts where comfort ends. Long before the name Rolls-Royce became a symbol of royalty and perfection, there was just a little boy named Henry Royce, barefoot, hungry, and determined to survive another day. He was born in 1863 in a small village in Olwalton, England, into a world where life offered no mercy to the poor. His father, a struggling flour mill owner, watched helplessly as the business failed, leaving the family with nothing but debts and broken dreams. When Henry was just 9 years old, he was forced to leave school and step into the harsh reality of labor. Childhood, for him, ended before it even began. He worked wherever he could, selling newspapers, delivering telegrams, even sleeping on cold factory floors just to earn a few pennies. The nights were long, the meals were scarce, and the world seemed blind to his struggle. Yet, while others complained about their fate, Henry found a strange kind of peace in hard work. He had something many others didn't, an unshakable curiosity. Every time he saw a piece of machinery, he wanted to know how it worked, why it moved, and what made it tick. While his hands were calloused from work, his mind was quietly sharpening into that of an engineer. In the dim light of gas lamps, young Henry would study whatever books he could borrow, scraps of knowledge about electricity, mechanics, and design. He didn't have a mentor or a university classroom. His workshop was the streets, his teachers were broken machines, and his lessons were written in grease and sweat. Poverty might have chained his body, but it never touched his mind. Life continued to test him. He moved from job to job, from fixing street lamps to working with the Great Northern Railway, cleaning engines far bigger than himself. The smell of coal, the hum of machines, the clanging of metal, these became the sounds of his world. And in that noise he found purpose. Every broken part he repaired taught him that even the most damaged things could be made new again, including his own life. But let's not forget, this was an era when class defined destiny. A poor boy from the countryside wasn't supposed to dream about invention, let alone building something the rich would one day worship. Yet in the midst of dirt, noise, and exhaustion, Henry began to imagine something extraordinary, machines that didn't just work, but worked beautifully. He dreamed of perfection, precision, and grace, ideas far too big for the tiny world he lived in. Each night, as the factory lights dimmed, he would whisper to himself a silent promise. One day I'll build something that will last forever. And that promise became the seed that would one day grow into the mighty Rolls-Royce empire. But before that could happen, Henry still had a long road to travel, one filled with failures, frustration, and the spark of genius that would soon change everything. Years passed, and the boy who once sold newspapers on street corners had turned into a young man with rough hands and a sharper mind. Henry Royce had no fancy degree, no mentor guiding him, and no safety net to fall back on. But what he did have was a quiet fire burning inside him, a hunger not just to live, but to create. His time at the Great Northern Railway had taught him discipline and precision. Every bolt, every gear, every hiss of steam fascinated him. Machines didn't scare Henry, they spoke to him. Where others saw a jumble of metal, he saw possibility. In his free hours, those rare, exhausted moments after long shifts, Henry would sit by the faint glow of a gas lamp and take apart whatever machinery he could find. Old motors, broken tools, even discarded electrical parts, to him, they were puzzles waiting to be understood. He didn't have money for new materials, so he'd scavenge junkyards, carrying home rusted scraps with more pride than gold. His mother worried that her son was chasing illusions. But Henry's reply was always the same: "I just want to build something that works better than what already exists." Then in his early 20s, life gave him a small window of opportunity. After years of saving every penny, Henry opened a tiny workshop in Manchester in 1884. He called it F.H. Royce and Company, and it specialized in making small electrical items, doorbells, dynamos, and cranes. The shop was humble: wooden tables, a few tools, and the constant hum of hard work. Yet it was there, among the clatter of gears and sparks of electricity, that Henry's true genius began to shine. He obsessed over perfection. If a machine worked well, he made it better. If it broke, he rebuilt it stronger. His motto was simple but powerful: "Whatever is rightly done, however humble, is noble." Those words guided his every move. His customers began to notice. His dynamos ran smoother. His cranes lifted heavier loads with precision and silence. The poor boy who once swept factory floors was now running his own workshop, not because of luck, but because of relentless dedication. But even as success began to trickle in, Henry wasn't satisfied. The world around him was changing. The age of electricity had dawned, and a new invention was captivating hearts and imaginations: the automobile. To most people it was a noisy, unreliable toy for the rich. To Henry Royce it was an unfinished masterpiece. He saw flaws, the vibrations, the inefficiency, the lack of refinement, and in those flaws he saw a challenge he couldn't resist. Each night, as he locked up his workshop, the thought haunted him: if others can build a car, why can't I build a better one? It was a question that would soon define his destiny. The sparks from his workbench were no longer just electrical. They were the sparks of genius, igniting a dream that would transform not only his life but the entire automotive world. Henry Royce didn't just discover his talent, he discovered his purpose. And that purpose would soon lead him to create a car so flawless, it would make even the wealthiest men pause in admiration. But before the world would call his name with respect, Henry had to face his greatest test yet: building the very first Royce motorcar from the ground up. By now, Henry Royce was no longer just a mechanic. He was a man possessed by a vision. His small Manchester workshop buzzed with the sound of ambition. The rhythmic clinking of tools, the hiss of steam, and the hum of electricity filled the air. But amidst the noise, there was one sound missing: the perfect hum of a car engine that ran smooth as silk. That was the sound Henry dreamed of creating. It was the early 1900s, and automobiles were still rare, noisy contraptions that coughed smoke and rattled down the streets like stubborn beasts. Most people laughed at them, calling them impractical toys for the rich. But Henry saw something different. He saw the future, and he believed he could make it better. He had never built a car before, yet that didn't stop him. In his mind, engineering was about logic, precision, and patience, and those he had in abundance. So in 1903, Henry Royce began building his first car. It was not a grand operation, just a handful of men, a small workshop, and a dream larger than the walls that surrounded them. Piece by piece, he crafted the machine with his bare hands. Every bolt was tightened with care, every curve measured to perfection. He didn't want speed, he wanted silence, smoothness, elegance. Where others used shortcuts, Henry used craftsmanship. Days turned into nights, nights into weeks. There were failures, miscalculations, and moments when exhaustion nearly broke him. But each mistake only sharpened his resolve. He rebuilt, refined, and retested until the metal responded exactly how he envisioned it. Then, one chilly morning in 1904, the doors of the workshop opened, and there it was, the first Royce car. It was a small, two-cylinder motorcar, elegant yet humble in appearance. When Henry turned the key and the engine came to life, something magical happened. It didn't roar, it purred. The car glided forward with a smoothness no one had ever seen before. His workers stood silent, awestruck. Henry didn't smile much, but that morning he allowed himself one. It wasn't pride, it was peace. He had done what others thought impossible. Word spread quickly. Engineers and businessmen who came to see the car couldn't believe what they witnessed. They said it felt alive, as if the machine itself had a soul. Henry's creation didn't just move, it floated. That single car became the symbol of everything he believed in: precision, perfection, and persistence. Soon, more orders began to come in. Royce built 3 more cars, each better than the last, but even then he wasn't satisfied. He didn't care about selling, he cared about mastering. His motto had evolved into something almost spiritual: strive for perfection in everything you do, take the best that exists and make it better. If it doesn't exist, create it. And yet, for all his genius, Henry Royce remained humble. He didn't seek fame, he sought function. He had built the car of his dreams, but he still didn't know that destiny was already knocking at his door. Because somewhere in London, another man, a wealthy aristocrat, car enthusiast and visionary businessman named Charles Rolls, had just heard whispers of a brilliant engineer in Manchester who had built the smoothest car in England. Rolls was intrigued. He had money, influence, and passion for automobiles. Royce had talent, discipline, and perfection. Their paths were about to cross, and when they did, history would never be the same again. The year was 1904, a year that would forever be etched into automotive history. Inside a modest workshop on Cook Street, Manchester, a small team of mechanics stood around a gleaming new machine, unlike anything the world had ever seen. This was Henry Royce's first motorcar, built entirely by hand, crafted with obsession and polished with perfection. It wasn't the biggest or the fastest car in the world, but it was, without a doubt, the best built. The car was called the Royce 10, a name simple yet powerful, much like the man behind it. From the outside it looked delicate, elegant even, but beneath its polished body lived a heart of mechanical brilliance. The 2-cylinder engine purred with an almost musical rhythm, silent and graceful, an orchestra of precision. Every nut, every bolt, every curve of the metal reflected Henry's relentless pursuit of excellence. When he first took it out for a test drive, the streets of Manchester turned to watch. People stopped, stared, and whispered, "That's the quietest car we've ever seen." But Henry wasn't driven by fame or wealth. He didn't even think of himself as a businessman. To him, this car was not just a machine, it was the result of every hardship he had endured, every sleepless night he had spent tinkering with broken engines. It was proof that perfection could rise from poverty. Yet, despite his masterpiece, he still worked from a small corner of the city, far away from the aristocrats and magnates who could turn his dream into a global legacy. That changed one afternoon when fate decided to intervene. A man named Henry Edmonds, a friend of both Royce and a wealthy car dealer named Charles Rolls, saw the Royce car and was blown away by its quality. He immediately told Rolls, "You have to meet this man. He's building the best car in England." At first, Rolls was skeptical. He had seen plenty of inventors claim greatness only to deliver disappointment. But when Edmonds insisted, Rolls agreed. A meeting was arranged, one that neither man could have predicted would alter the course of history. When Charles Rolls arrived at Royce's humble workshop, he expected a showman. Instead, he found a quiet, serious engineer, hands covered in oil, eyes filled with focus. Royce didn't talk much, he didn't need to. His work spoke louder than any words ever could. Rolls was invited for a test drive, and the moment the wheels turned, everything changed. The car glided smoothly over rough roads, silent, stable, and graceful. Rolls was stunned. He turned to Royce and said, "Mr. Royce, this is the best motorcar I have ever driven." In that instant, a partnership was born, one between genius and opportunity, craftsmanship and vision, Royce and Rolls. They agreed that Royce would build the cars and Rolls would sell them under a single name, Rolls-Royce. 2 men from opposite worlds, one an engineer of humble origins, the other an aristocrat with connections, united by a shared passion for excellence. When their collaboration was announced later that year, the world took notice. Newspapers wrote about the perfect partnership, but few understood just how revolutionary this union would become. Together, they would set out to create cars not merely to move people, but to inspire them. Cars so flawless they would be called the best in the world. As the sun set on that defining day, Henry Royce stood outside his workshop, gazing at the car that had changed everything. He didn't smile or celebrate, he simply placed his hand on the bonnet and whispered to himself, "Now it begins." What began that day wasn't just a company. It was the birth of a legend, a symbol of craftsmanship, class, and an unyielding belief that true perfection is never an accident. It was a crisp spring morning in 1904, and London's air carried a strange kind of excitement, the kind that comes when fate is quietly preparing to change history. In a modest corner of Manchester, Henry Royce stood beside his pride and creation, a shining motorcar polished to perfection. Meanwhile, in a world far removed from grease and gears, Charles Rolls, a wealthy gentleman, entrepreneur, and one of Britain's first motor enthusiasts, was on his way to meet the man everyone was suddenly talking about, the poor engineer who built the smoothest car in England. When Rolls stepped into Royce's workshop, the contrast between the two men was striking. Rolls, tall, elegant, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, Royce short, serious, in worn work clothes, his hands darkened by years of labour. Yet the moment their eyes met, there was mutual respect. Royce didn't bow to wealth, and Rolls didn't look down on hard work. They were men from different worlds, but their hearts beat for the same dream, the pursuit of perfection. Henry didn't waste time with small talk. He simply gestured to the car and said, "Would you like to see it run?" Rolls nodded. Moments later, the Royce 10 rolled out of the workshop, and as the engine quietly came to life, Rolls' skepticism melted into awe. The car moved forward, smooth and steady, gliding across the uneven road with a grace Rolls had never experienced. There was no rattling, no noise, just quiet power. For the first time, Rolls was speechless. When the car came to a stop, Rolls turned to Henry and said softly, "Mr. Royce, this is the finest motorcar I have ever driven." Those words marked the birth of a bond that would soon reshape the world of luxury automobiles. They sat down afterward, surrounded by the smell of oil and steel, and began to talk not about money or contracts but about ideas. Rolls spoke of his dream to build a brand that would set new standards in motoring, cars that combined power, reliability and refinement. Royce spoke of his obsession with engineering perfection, creating machines that would outlive their makers. The two men realized they shared the same vision, though from entirely different perspectives. Rolls had the name, the network and the means. Royce had the skill, the mind and the heart. Together they could create something extraordinary. That very day, over a simple handshake and shared conviction, Rolls and Royce formed a partnership that would change everything. Their agreement was simple. Henry Royce would design and build the cars. Charles Rolls would sell them under one name, Rolls-Royce. The fusion of their worlds created a perfect balance, aristocracy meeting artistry, wealth meeting wisdom. Rolls brought prestige, Royce brought precision. What they built together wasn't just a company but a philosophy, that true luxury is not about excess but about excellence. In the months that followed, Rolls-Royce unveiled their first joint creation, a motorcar so refined, so silent that it felt alive. The press called it the marriage of mechanical genius and noble vision. Orders began to pour in from gentlemen, industrialists and royals alike. Suddenly, the poor boy from Olwalton found himself crafting masterpieces for kings. But Henry Royce never forgot where he came from. While Rolls mingled with London's elite, Henry stayed in his workshop, hands steady, mind focused, perfecting every part down to the smallest screw. To him, success wasn't the applause of the world, it was the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had built something flawless. And yet, even as their partnership flourished, both men were unaware that their creation was about to become far more than a luxury brand. It was about to become a legend. The partnership between Charles Rolls and Henry Royce was more than a business deal. It was the meeting of two souls obsessed with perfection. In an era when the world was just beginning to embrace the automobile, these two men weren't simply building cars, they were building a legacy. Their vision was clear: to create the finest motorcar ever made, one so exceptional that it would set a standard for generations to come. While Rolls handled the public and the elite, charming investors, organizing races and dazzling London's upper class, Royce stayed in the workshop, immersed in bolts, blueprints and precision. He was a man who believed that perfection is found not in what you add, but in what you refuse to compromise. Every day he pushed his engineers harder. Every line drawn, every screw tightened, every part tested, all had to meet his impossible standards. Good enough simply didn't exist in Henry Royce's vocabulary. Out of this obsession came a creation that would make history, the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. When it was unveiled in 1907, the world was stunned. Painted silver with gleaming details and an engine so silent it was called the Whispering Wonder, it wasn't just a car, it was an experience. During testing, the Silver Ghost ran for over 14,000 miles without a single breakdown, an unimaginable feat for its time. Newspapers hailed it as the best car in the world. The philosophy behind it was simple yet profound: take the best that exists and make it better. If it doesn't exist, create it. That became the heartbeat of Rolls-Royce. Every vehicle they built wasn't just assembled, it was crafted. Each car was treated as a masterpiece, its spirit shaped by the hands that built it. No two were identical, every detail was deliberate. For Charles Rolls, the Silver Ghost was proof that luxury could coexist with performance. For Henry Royce, it was proof that precision could achieve immortality. Together, they weren't selling transportation, they were selling trust, reliability and excellence. Their cars didn't just carry passengers, they carried pride. Soon, Rolls-Royce cars began appearing in the garages of the world's most powerful people, kings, lords, and industrial giants. The name Rolls-Royce became synonymous with quality beyond question. It wasn't merely a brand, it was a statement. If it bore the Rolls-Royce emblem, it was the best that humanity could create. But behind the shine and success, Henry Royce remained the same man he always was: quiet, methodical, humble. He still wore his old clothes to work and preferred the company of machines to men. Fame didn't change him. If anything, it made him more determined to protect the integrity of his craft. His perfectionism became legendary. He once ordered an entire batch of parts melted down because they were a fraction of an inch off. To Royce, excellence wasn't a goal, it was a moral duty. Meanwhile, Charles Rolls continued to take their cars to the skis, quite literally. A daring aviator, Rolls became the first man to complete a non-stop double flight across the English Channel. For him, Rolls-Royce wasn't limited to the road, it was a symbol of progress itself. Together, their combined vision pushed boundaries the world had never imagined. The Silver Ghost wasn't just a car, it was a philosophy on wheels, a reflection of what happens when two dreamers refuse to settle for mediocrity. And as the world began to recognize the magic of Rolls-Royce, one thing became clear: this was no ordinary success story. It was the birth of a timeless legend. But every great legacy comes with trials, and soon both men would face challenges that would test the very foundation of what they built. From global wars to personal loss, the path ahead would not be easy. Yet through every storm, their vision of perfection that endures would guide the way. Every great story has its storm, the moment when everything built with sweat and passion is tested by fire. For Henry Royce and Charles Rolls, that moment came not long after their shining success. The name Rolls-Royce was spreading across continents, whispered with reverence in royal palaces and industrial boardrooms alike. But behind the prestige, both men were fighting battles the world couldn't see. For Charles Rolls, his spirit was as restless as the engines he adored. Though Rolls-Royce was thriving, his heart belonged not only to the road but also to the sky. Aviation was the new frontier, dangerous, unpredictable, and exhilarating. Rolls became one of the earliest pioneers of flight in Britain, seeing in it the same promise he once saw in automobiles. In 1910, during an airshow in Bournemouth, he climbed into his Wright Flyer, his face calm, his eyes filled with purpose. Moments later, tragedy struck. His plane crashed, and Charles Rolls was killed instantly at just 32 years old. News of his death shattered the nation. For Henry Royce, it was more than the loss of a business partner, it was the loss of a kindred spirit. The visionary who had opened the doors of opportunity was gone. Royce buried himself in work, channeling his grief into precision. To him, the best way to honor Rolls' memory was to keep building cars that would never die, even if their creators did. But challenges didn't end there. The First World War loomed on the horizon, and the demand for luxury cars plummeted overnight. Rolls-Royce had to adapt or disappear. Instead of shutting down, Royce turned to innovation once again. His engineers began developing aircraft engines for the British military, determined to help their country in its hour of need. It was a bold move, transforming from a luxury automaker into a critical defense supplier, but it changed the company's destiny forever. Out of this wartime effort came the Rolls-Royce Eagle, an engine so powerful and reliable that it became the beating heart of Allied aircraft. Pilots trusted it with their lives. When Britain's aviators returned victorious, many credited Rolls-Royce for keeping them in the sky. The company that once built cars for kings was now helping win wars, proving that true excellence can adapt, survive, and serve. But the toll of war and endless work weighed heavily on Henry Royce. His health, always fragile, began to decline. Doctors warned him to rest, but rest was something Royce never understood. Even as illness consumed his body, his mind refused to stop creating. He continued sketching designs from his bed, sending notes and instructions to his engineers daily. His dedication became almost mythical, the image of a man who would rather die designing than live without purpose. Through every setback, from personal loss to global conflict, Rolls-Royce emerged not weaker but stronger. The company's philosophy remained unshaken: perfection first, profit second. Competitors tried to imitate their style, but none could capture the soul that Royce had poured into every bolt and bearing. By the time peace returned, the name Rolls-Royce meant something more than wealth. It meant trust, durability, and integrity, values forged in the fire of hardship. Henry Royce had built more than machines, he had built an identity that transcended time. As he looked upon his creation in his later years, frail yet fulfilled, He understood that life's greatest triumphs are born not from comfort, but from struggle. Rolls-Royce had faced war, loss, and pain, and through it all it had become immortal. Decades have passed since Henry Royce last walked through his workshop, his hands steady, his eyes sharp, his spirit unyielding. But even long after his passing, his presence still lingers in every corner of the Rolls-Royce legacy. The name has become eternal, not merely a car company, but a symbol of human perfection. World changed drastically. New technologies emerged, competitors rose and fell, but Rolls-Royce remained untouched by time. Each generation inherited the same philosophy that Royce built his life upon: strive for perfection in everything you do, take the best that exists and make it better. Those words became scripture inside the company. Every engineer, every designer, every craftsman knew they were not just making cars, they were carrying a torch lit by a man who refused to settle for ordinary. The spirit of Rolls-Royce lived on through innovation. The company expanded far beyond the realm of luxury cars. It became a cornerstone of aviation and engineering, producing engines that powered not just planes, but entire industries. The same meticulous precision that once defined the silver Ghost now roared through the skies in the form of jet engines, engines that carried passengers across oceans and astronauts into the edge of space. And on the roads, Rolls-Royce continued to redefine what it meant to travel in elegance. Each car became a moving masterpiece, handcrafted by artisans who treated their work like fine art. The Phantom, Ghost, Cullinan and Spectre, names that echo luxury, grace and silent power, each model a testament to the idea that perfection is not a destination, but a never-ending journey. What once began as the dream of a poor boy tinkering in a small workshop had become an empire of excellence, admired by presidents, owned by royalty, and desired by dreamers. Yet beneath the polished hood ornaments and gleaming paintwork, the heart of Henry Royce still beats, steady, humble, determined. The world remembers Rolls-Royce not just for its cars, but for what it represents. It stands as proof that greatness is built, not born, that true success is the result of persistence, vision, and a refusal to compromise values. From the cobbled streets of a poor English neighborhood to the grand avenues of global prestige, Rolls-Royce became the embodiment of possibility. Even now, in a world dominated by automation and speed, Rolls-Royce remains rooted in craftsmanship. Each car still takes months to complete. Every stitch in its leather, every brush of its paint, is a tribute to the man who started it all, a boy who once had nothing but a dream and the courage to chase it. Museums today display Henry Royce's early sketches beside the gleaming luxury of modern Rolls-Royce vehicles. Visitors stand in awe, not just of the machines, but of the journey. They see in that story a reflection of humanity's best qualities: resilience, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Rolls-Royce is no longer just a company, it's a philosophy, a movement, a legacy that transcends time.